So we are a little bit over a month away from Journey's first album in 11 years. Freedom comes out July 8th, and it is their first album since 2011's Eclipse. I honestly didn't know if we would ever get another album, but I know that I am definitely very excited to check it out. So I figured the best way to celebrate a new Journey album would be to explore Journey's entire history, going all the way back to the very beginning. So this is going to be the first part of a 13-part series exploring all of Journey's album releases. We are going to start with the initial 1975 release. We're going to cover the Greg Raleigh years and then transition into the Steve Perry era and then into the Steve Algieri era and then finally into the current Arnel Pineda era. This is going to be a lot of fun, I think. We're going to try to dive deep. I'm not going to be too harsh on these albums. I think it's just fun to really look at and explore this band's history and their evolution, no pun intended. So I think that this will be a really fun series. So if you guys are interested, just make sure you subscribe, like the video, and let's get into part one of our 13-part series exploring each Journey release. The journey of the mid 1970s was much different than the band that we are used to today. They were founded in 1973 as the Golden Gate Rhythm Section. The band was very instrumental and experimental and really was more of a jazz fusion band than anything. Now Journey is like a rock band, a pop rock band, but they were not like that in the beginning. We had a very different lineup compared to what we would later get. This even predates Steve Perry, who didn't even join the band until after the third album. So this is the very first album from Journey, which was called Journey. It was released in 1975. The lineup for that album was Neil Schon on guitar, of course. Neil is the only consistent member of Journey. He's been present since the start, has never left the band, and he has been on every single recording for the band. Neil is Journey. I know that it's easy to identify Journey with Steve Perry because the vocals in Journey's commercially successful albums and songs are so prominent, but Neil Schon really is Journey. He's been there from the beginning. The original album on rhythm guitar had George Tickner, who would leave the band shortly after this album due to a dislike of touring. And then on bass, we had Ross Valerie, who was in the band. He was in the band until 1986. Had a brief window where he was not in the band after getting fired, and then he returned to the band with Trial by Fire in 1996 and stayed in the band until 2020 when he was again fired. That's a whole different story though. But Ross was on nearly every Journey album, and he was on bass from the start in the first album as well. And then on keys and on vocals in these early albums was Greg Raleigh. Greg Raleigh he has a much different vocal style than what we would later get with Steve Perry or Steve Algieri or Arnel Pineda. I think his vocal style worked for that earlier sound, but it's not really. He doesn't have the power of like the frontman, like lead singer power that you get from a Steve Perry. He was an excellent keyboard player. He would stay in the band until after the Departure album, and after that he did some various things. Most notably, he has played a lot with Ringo Starr. And then on drums on this first album, we had British drummer Ainsley Dunbar, and I apologize if I'm butchering that pronunciation. Ainsley Dunbar was initially with David Bowie. He joined the band in the early 1970s. He replaced the very first drummer for the band, Prairie Prince, who was in the band when they were the Golden Gate Rhythm Section. So like I said before, the first album from Journey is very different compared to their later catalog. It's not very commercial. It's a mostly instrumental album that Features some vocals, but it's not the focus here. Later Journey music, the vocals were definitely the focus. That's why they brought in a singer like Steve Perry. But in these early days, the vocals were not the focus. They were very instrumental. This is a jazz fusion, progressive rock album. It had 7 tracks. They were Of a Lifetime, In the Morning Day, Kahutek, To Play Some Music, which was the first and only single, Topaz, In My Lonely Feeling, and Mystery Mountain. So, despite being mostly instrumental and I would say not very accessible for the average listener, I think this album is still very impressive for what it does accomplish. And that is showing off the guitar playing skills of Neil Schon. Neil Schon was only 20 when this album was recorded, which is absolutely incredible when you actually sit down and listen to what he was able to put out at 20 years old. We get that typical melodic guitar playing that Neil Schon is known for today, and we also get virtuoso guitar solos. Obviously, his talent has grown since 1975, but it's very fascinating to be able to go back to his very first album with Journey and to see that raw talent there. I don't think we really saw Neil Schon unleashed again like we did on this album until 2011's Eclipse, when he kind of took the lead. And it's incredible seeing Neil play like this. It's a raw style compared to the more commercial sound that we got later. So yeah, guitars are the showcase of this record, I think, but the keyboards are what really push this towards progressive music. With the keys, you get a sound that's very similar to something by Yes, or even early Styx and the Wood Nickel era, or even Equinox from Styx. And I don't mean that as a detriment. I think that's actually a really big positive. It's a really nice sound that works well for this album. We do get different genres from these tracks. Of a Lifetime is very progressive. It's the opening track. When you listen to this track, you know exactly what this album is going to sound like, but then you transition to the second track, and it's jazz. So you get a variety of sounds here, but the whole goal, it seems, of this album is to showcase the musicians and the musicianship. And that is most highlighted with the lead single, To Play Some Music. To Play Some Music is, I think it was the best choice for a single. It's not a very long track, and it showcases every instrument very well. This is one that to me really felt like something that you would see from Styx, from like the Lorelei era, or from the Equinox era. It reminded me of Lorelei, and the way the different instruments were showcased. But you get a proggy key solo in the middle. You get a fast guitar solo. It's the perfect single for this album, I think. Greg Raleigh as a vocalist is, like I said prior, he's very different than what we would get later. You can tell he's not really, like, he provides vocals. He is by definition the lead vocalist, but he doesn't really have the presence of a front man. And I don't think he needs to for this kind of music. I think it's perfect for what this album has. What they had at this time, this is perfect vocals for this kind of music. When Journey went to go more commercial and more straightforward, like rock band, with Infinity, it made sense to bring in someone like Steve Perry because they were going for a different style, a different effect. But this early album really just is meant to showcase these musicians, and it does it very well. It's very impressive. These guys were very young at the time, so it's incredible that they put out this kind of music at this caliber on their first album. This is like a classic put on your headphones type album. This is an album that you don't really want to jam out to in the car. This is one where you want to sit down with a nice pair of headphones and just listen to this album start to finish. It's a perfect LP. It's meant to just be listened to straight through, which is what I did when I listened to it for review. And I think it's just, the tracks flow together very well. It's easy to just sit and really just listen to it when you're just focused on this music. I think some standout tracks. That first track, Of a Lifetime, is phenomenal. It's a great opener. One of the better openers that Journey has put out, I think. Kahutak is a very great instrumental track. And then, like I said before, To Play Some Music is a very good single from this album. It's a perfect single. It really showcases what you're going to get from this album. So, I mean, this album it was a bit tricky to review, honestly, because it's just so different compared to what we would get later. And I have listened to this album before, but it just sitting down and actually listening to it with from an analytical perspective and from the mindset that I'm going to review it, it was a bit tricky. But I think that for any Journey fan, I do think it's worth at least visiting some of these tracks just so you can see the genesis of this band. I think, that's why I'm doing this series, so that we can actually follow Journey's evolution from the very beginning all the way now to 2022 with Freedom. So, I mean, what do you guys think? If any of you were around when this album came out, if you remember when this album came out, I would love to hear about it in the comments, because I think a lot of Journey fans came in after this. A lot, if you're older, you probably came in during Departure, during Escape, when they really hit their commercial peak. And if you're younger like me, then you grew up with the famous songs on the radio, and then you either explored the band further like I did, or you just know those hits. So if there are any of you that were fans of this album when it came out, or you are more familiar with this album, I would love to hear about it in the comments, because I think it's fascinating with a band that has a history, almost 50-year history, to hear from the different generations and ages of fans. I mean, that's one of the reasons I started this YouTube channel, is so that I could cover music from way long before I was born, and look at it from just a different perspective. So yeah, I would love to hear from you guys in the comments. And if you like the video, please hit that like button. Definitely hit that subscribe, because like I said, we are going to cover every Journey album up into Freedom. I'm going to try to do it before Freedom launches on July 8th. May not get there, we'll see. But we're going to cover every album, and we're really going to follow the evolution of this band. And we're going to see how they changed over time, for better or for worse. I think, they had their ups and downs like any band, but this was the start. Journey, the 1975 album, was the start of an epic career. So yeah, until next time, guys.